in here. And all right, we are underway. I'm in Chattanooga, Tennessee tonight. Who knows which of your homes I will show up in next Wednesday? Could be anyone. Probably not. Glad everybody's here. We're going to be looking tonight at a story that is either, for most people, either one of their favorites or one they don't like too much at all. So we're going to be looking at Mary and Martha, and spend some time with them. There's really three kind of significant stories in the Gospels, one in Luke, two in John, that have to do with Mary and Martha. And we may look at all of them. We may look at just one or two of them, depending on our time and how it goes. But I chose this story because in a lot of ways it sort of I think encapsulates some of the struggles that we have with some of these questions and some of these some of the struggles with gender roles and that sort of thing that we sometimes deal with in the church. So let's start in Luke chapter 10. If you grab a Bible, if you would, and let's look at Luke 10:38. That's where we'll be starting tonight. Would somebody want to read that for us? Luke 10:38 to 42. Not a long story. Or I'll just read it. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet, listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me." "Martha, Martha," the Lord answered, "you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or only one. Mary has chosen what's better, and it will not be taken away from her." As we start, what are your thoughts on that story? What do you see there that stands out to you? One thing that stands out to me right from the start is it's Martha who welcomes Jesus. It seems like it's Martha's place, Martha's home. She seems to be the one who is in charge. She seems to be the one who welcomes Jesus and extends the word actually has to do with extending hospitality and welcoming him under her roof in a culture in which hospitality was extraordinarily important, right? Let's just back up a second. Why would hospitality be so much more important, say, in Jesus' world than in ours? I mean, it's kind of important in our world, there's social ramifications. There's, you want to have, you want to have people over and it be a nice time for them. You want the food to be good, whatever. But what's different about our time than Jesus' time related to hospitality?
There weren't restaurants. There weren't hotels.
No restaurants, no hotels. Travelers, right? They come into a certain town, they come into a place, and there's not a lot of options, right? For where to find food, where to find lodging, a place to sleep. So it's real important. Hospitality becomes extremely important, extraordinarily important. There's a sort of a social contract that is assumed. The other thing that struck me as I was reading this for the first time, I don't know why this struck me just for the first time. It's not like Jesus can call ahead, right? It's not like he can make a quick phone call and say, "Hey, Martha, I'll be by, tomorrow around dinner time." Presumably, he just shows up. Maybe he sends somebody on ahead, who knows? But I mean, she can't have a whole lot of notice, right? And here he is, and not just him, but this whole entourage that he travels with, and they're all showing up at the house, and Martha welcomes them into her home. So it's quite a large gesture for Martha, right? It's something very important, and it's something that she fulfills extremely well. She takes the responsibility and welcomes him in. Often the male head of household would be the one to officially welcome someone in. So Martha probably is the owner of the place. Martha's probably the one who's sort of the head of household de facto. And she welcomes him in, and she's going about all the business of preparing the food, or she's supervising the people who are preparing the food, whatever. And it's a lot of work, because it's Jesus, it's at least 12 other guys, right? And they're all here to eat, to stay. What else do you notice about this story? What else stands out to you?
Mary wanted to hear what Jesus was saying.
So you've got the contrast, right? You've got Martha trying to get everything prepared. You've got Mary sitting at Jesus' feet. That's actually kind of a loaded phrase, sitting at Jesus' feet. It's not just about where she chose to sit or where she found a place to sit. It has to do with being a disciple of Jesus. She is literally taking a position as one of Jesus's disciples. She is sitting there with him, listening to him teach, and nobody challenges that. Nobody thinks that's odd, and it's very odd for a rabbi to have a female disciple. It's almost unheard of. There are a couple of instances of it recorded in first century Judaism, second century Judaism, a rabbi having a female disciple, but she's not taken real seriously, and there's not a lot of acceptance of this. So don't shortchange the fact that this is an unusual occurrence. And we already know Jesus has some female disciples. We've already seen that. And Mary takes her place, literally sitting at his feet. That's the posture of a disciple, listening to Jesus teach. So she wants to hear, as you said, Pam. She wants to listen. She wants to hear what he has to say, so she can obey and follow and be like it. What else do you notice?
Well, I think the word distracted is interesting, because I think it would be important to feed and take care of your guest, and that's not the word that was used. The word that was used is she was distracted by it. So everybody needs Martha's to make sure that everybody gets fed, but she was distracted by it.
She's distracted, and it is an interesting word choice. Did everybody hear that? Laura pointed out the word choice of she's distracted. And it is an interesting word choice. It's one of those things where, like, it's all good and well that Martha wants to sit, or Mary wants to sit there and listen. That works really well until somebody gets hungry and starts looking for dinner, right? And now now we're looking for somebody to make some food, right? We're looking for somebody to get dinner ready. So distraction is an interesting word. What do you think that means? That she is distracted by the preparations that are necessary. Why is that word used?
Maybe it's because here is Jesus, and when your guest comes to your home, maybe the attention should be on the guest,
Okay.
and not on preparing, and especially on Jesus, not just any guest.
Okay. I mean, it's true, right? There are practical things to consider, how we're going to eat, but yeah, I do think that one of the assumptions in that culture would have been the guest becomes sort of the focus of attention, and particularly when it's Jesus. And so maybe there's a light rebuke is the wrong word in that way. And Jesus doesn't ever rebuke Martha for choosing to prepare the food, right? You don't see that. What does he rebuke Martha for, if it's a rebuke? I don't even know if you call it a rebuke. What does he say to Martha?
That Mary has chosen what is better.
Mary has chosen what's better, and you are worried and upset about many things. And it's that many things, right? It's that you've got all this stuff running around in your head, Martha, including your concern over what your sister's up to and what she's not up to. And you're letting that distract you from what is important. Few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from. And again, I ask, better until somebody realizes nobody's had dinner. Yeah. Is that reasonable? I mean, what do you think about that? What do you think about one thing being better than the other?
I think Martha got a bum rap.
Mom thinks Martha got a bum rap.
Maybe Martha also would have preferred to be sitting at Jesus' feet, but she was distracted because she couldn't, because of all the prep work that she knew in her mind had to be done.
So Martha perhaps would have preferred to be sitting there listening to Jesus, but somebody's got to get the food ready. Somebody's got to make all the preparations.
Do we remember that Jesus can feed 1,000?
Laura says, do we remember that Jesus can feed 5,000 people with? And that's a good point as well, right? That was when there were no women present, right? It was just the disciples. So we got to do something. So, yeah.
I think too, the word worried and upset kind of, we're told not to be worried and not to be upset. And that's why it's secondary, I think, is because what it's producing in her, the anxiety and just being distracted and missing out on just a small welcome to Jesus, perhaps. Maybe not the sitting at his feet, but the worry has her so caught up that she can't even say hi. Well, of course, I just made that all up. It doesn't say that, but worry and upset. You know, it's not, he says, don't worry. We're not to worry.
Right.
You know, without suggesting that the story didn't happen the way it is, there is a storytelling technique where you where you focus certain attributes in one character and certain attributes in another character to heighten a contrast. Like in Highlights magazine, there was Goofus and Gallant, right? The point being, I'm not actually sure the gospel writers meant people to choose between being Mary and Martha. I know for purposes of the story to illustrate, you know, their characters are sort of defined in certain channels, but no one's all Mary, no one's all Martha. I think you're actually maybe supposed to look at this and say, how do I get the good of Mary, but also understand what Martha's doing? And to some extent, by the way, Jesus is, there's also the, you know, discussion in the Bible of words versus deeds. You know, it's all well and good to just, you know, have the mental acceptance and desire for knowledge, but at some point, love and service is shown by doing stuff. So I'm just suggesting, instead of saying who would we choose to be, maybe the writer is asking us to figure out how we can combine these two things in our lives. But that's just a possibility.
And I don't think it's a bad thought. You know, I do think that for most of us, you see some things about both that you can appreciate. Hospitality is a biblical virtue, right? That you know, Paul in his letters says, be hospitable to one, welcome one another. You know, that's a biblical virtue. What she's doing is a very important part of life in her world, and it's central to demonstrating care and responsibility for the community. So what she's doing is certainly far from a bad thing. And I do think we need to say that, because it sometimes gets portrayed as because Jesus says Mary's chosen the better thing. Well, in this circumstance, sure, if Martha's gonna come to Jesus and say, shouldn't my sister be helping me? Jesus is going to say, Martha, if she wants to listen, that's a good thing. That's the better thing.
Well, and maybe it's the
Martha
better
is, of course,
thing
the one
because
who
Jesus,
presses Jesus, right, to
Well-
take a side in this thing.
but maybe it's because Jesus knows Martha has the cooking under control, that it was Mary's chosen the better thing. It's the things are interrelated a bit here.
I think other scriptures make it very clear that Martha is not always the one that only does the hospitality. I mean, she also does the learning, is what I'm trying to say. So it's really, I think, to say, are you more like Martha, are you more like Mary, is wrong when we know in John that Martha had a very deep theological discussion when Lazarus died with Jesus.
Yep.
She has not been working to the exclusion of learning from Jesus. I think it's very clear that she is clearly also a student. So I kind of don't like the idea that this one story has defined Martha more than the John story.
That's exactly right. I want, that was one of the reasons I wanted to look at that John story. So let's pull out of the Luke story for a second. Let's turn to John 11. Since Christy brought it up, I think it's a really good point and something we ought to look at. John 11. Now this is, Lazarus has been sick, right? And Jesus waits to go to see him. The theory, the assumption, people are saying, you need to go see him. Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going there to wake him up. Verse 14, Lazarus is dead. For your sake, I'm glad I was not there, so that you may believe, but let us go to him. So verse 20, when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. Lord, Martha said, now Martha's taking some initiative here, right? Martha, she's not waiting for Jesus to get to the home. She goes out to meet him. She hears he's on the way in, and she goes out to meet him. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now, God will give you whatever you ask. She's bold, right? She came to him in Luke and said, hey, tell my sister to help me out. She comes here to him in John and says, if you'd been here, he wouldn't have died. But even now, God will do whatever you ask him to do. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha answered, I know he'll rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? It's kind of like, right? Here's what I learned in Sunday school, or here's what I learned in synagogue, right? And Jesus says, well, what you learned about that hope you had, that's me. Do you believe that? Is that something you're really willing to put your faith in? And she says, verse 27, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. That's for the Gospel of John, that is a very rare occurrence for somebody to say, I believe that you're the Messiah. I believe it. I know it. So yeah, don't sleep on Martha, right? She's no, it's not that she's not wanting to be a disciple, right? It's not that she doesn't believe in Jesus. It's not that she doesn't have faith. This is a moment of personal grief and pain for her, and her faith isn't wavering. I believe that you're the Messiah. I believe God will do whatever you ask. And we know how the story winds up, right? By the way, you get to Mary, and Mary falls at his feet. In every occurrence where you have Mary, Luke 10, John 11, and then in John 12, Mary is found at Jesus's feet. I don't know if that's intentional or not, but it's really interesting. It's a really interesting thing to note. Always she is right there at Jesus's feet. And that's where she winds up as well here in the story of Lazarus. So let's go back to, all right, comments about that or thoughts about that. I mean, a really good point that Martha Martha believes, Martha has faith. Martha is not, not just so concerned with the things of cooking and cleaning in the house and the domestic that she can't see the significance of Jesus. So that's not what's happening in Luke 10. Yes.
And I think to emphasize, it's not just that she sees Jesus and believes, but she is well schooled.
Yep.
Particularly for her gender, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
She knows a lot, just like the woman at the well seemed to know a lot, even though she wasn't even Jewish. But
Right. That she does. She knows a lot. She's well taught, well schooled. She has learned. She's been with Jesus, right? She's known him. And her faith has come from this experience she's had. It's interesting when Jesus says that Mary has chosen the better thing. That's quite a smack at the assumptions that most people would have had, male or female, in Jesus's time about women. Martha has chosen the better thing for women in Jesus's culture, right? She's in the kitchen, she's taking care of the food, she's taking care of the house. That's the better thing as far as everybody's concerned, right? Jesus says, no, discipleship is the better thing. Listening is the better thing. Learning is the better thing. And that's for male or female. That's for men and women. And that's in our culture, we go, well, of course. But in Jesus's time, that's quite a statement to make.
Well, not to say this is wrong, because I believe in being emotional. I believe we've been given the ability to share all of our different emotions. But that's what I see with Martha. I don't think that she's ignorant of who Jesus is and she's knowledgeable, but I think a lot of her actions seem to come from an emotional place. And, like, why did you let my brother die? Didn't you know he was dead? And, all of the same thing about, I have all this work to do, help me cook the meal or whatever she was doing. So I see her letting her emotions and she's not in control of them. They are seemingly controlling her. And that's what seems faulty, that I don't know if that's what Jesus is talking to her about when he says she's chosen the better thing, to be more calm, to sit at my feet. It doesn't say that. But when I read both accounts, and when I look at Martha, I'm feeling like, come on, shh. You can do all of those things, but she seems to be a bit emotional, or moving or acting from an emotional point. And I don't necessarily think that's wrong, because I think we get to be emotional, but that's how it appears to me.
She's certainly not shy about saying what she's feeling, right? I mean, you definitely see that. She's not gonna pull her punches,
I think it's a curious sentence. I'm not sure what it refers to when Jesus says, Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things. There is need of only one thing.
Mhm.
Mary has chosen. I wonder what the one thing is. Like, I think the assumption is there's need only of learning, which makes all of us say, well, what about the food?
Yeah.
But I don't know the language structure enough to know. I mean, it could be that we just have to eat. We don't have to have it perfect. I mean,
Go ahead.
It's kind of like the person that has to have everything in the party perfect, or it's a whole disaster.
Yeah.
And when what the purpose of the party is not to show you can do a perfect party, it's to show that come in, have a nice time, share a meal, spend time together. I don't know. I think it has those two possibilities, but it may be that the problem was Martha was fussing about the stuff that wasn't quite as critical. I don't know. I mean, I don't think she was putting up decorations, but you know what I mean? I don't know. It's a curious little sentence I hadn't noticed
Yes,
until I reread
it
it
is.
yesterday.
And I did kind of assume, I think I do sort of look at that, and I sort of have assumed that Jesus means, just, and especially because he says Mary has chosen what's better. I guess I've sort of always assumed the one thing is to sit at Jesus' feet, to listen, to stop and to to hear. A lot of the early Christians would read this account and would write about the contemplative life and the life of a person who can reflect on Christ and on their faith and on God and stay away from the things that are distracting and pulling them away. So I don't know, but you make a good point, and I don't think I think whether that's what that means or not, I do think that's what's got Martha in a twist. It's not so much even, well, somebody's got to cook. It's somebody's got to cook, and my sister's not helping me, and and everything's falling apart, and everything's flying apart, and I can't keep it together, and I can't keep all the, and Jesus is saying, all right, Martha, you're getting pulled away from what really is important, what really matters.
Patrick, may I say something?
Please do.
I've always felt that when I read this, that perhaps this was not the first time that if you've done families and you have with several sisters, sometimes the dynamics do work that way. Nothing to back that up, you understand, it's just a feeling.
Perhaps it is not the first time that Mary has left Martha to do all the stuff.
Patrick, one
Yes.
thing too, just push back a little bit, because that's what I do. We say and celebrate that Mary has chosen the better thing, but apparently it's only devotion to the Word of God in amateur status, right? Because in our fellowship, at least when I was at Lipscomb, and I know things have changed, you couldn't be a woman Bible major, right? Apparently, and we're talking about roles of women, notwithstanding Jesus's approval of this as being the best choice, apparently we still don't want to let women take it too far. And maybe we sort of actually push the distraction upon them by excluding them from roles in which they could, carry out this function more comfortably. And since we are talking sort of about with an eye towards women, Jesus's approval of this wholeheartedly, to the disregard of, womanly, wifely, household duties and the like. I mean, that may have some significance that we've overlooked.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that the women couldn't be Bible majors when you were there. They were actually prohibited from it when you were at Lipscomb?
Yes, because they might then claim that they were Lipscomb trained preachers.
So
you understand? That's my understanding. That
when Josh was at Lipscomb, I was there for a couple of things that the doctoral students were doing. I went down for a couple of things, and the doctoral cohort that was there when I was going down for some things was predominantly women. So that's really interesting. And that, I think there's definitely been some changes in that regard over the years.
Well, when
But you're
you
not
were at
wrong.
Harding, did you know any women Bible majors?
There were two.
But there were only 2 science majors as well.
Loris, there's only 2 female science majors as well, so.
Because that makes it so much better, right?
Well, but economically, I mean, the fact is that if we basically exclude them from having an opportunity to earn a living
Right.
at this, then we are indirectly basically forcing them to be distracted, right? We're denying them economically, absent, you know, the assumption that they're going to get married and somebody, you know, there's going to be another income, you know, or something. We are foreclosing the ability to sort of go all in along the Mary role. If they were, by the way, if they were called to do that, I don't think everyone is called to do that. And yeah.
Patrick,
Yeah, go ahead.
interestingly, I only take time to read from time to time, so I don't want to give the impression I'm a cover to cover reader, but Christianity Today had a story about Martha not that long ago, and in the mythology, not the truth, but the mythology of Martha, she was quite something after
Yeah.
Jesus died. And it's interesting that, I mean, supposedly someone, her maid, wrote something that was probably written by a monk instead or something like that about how she ended up in France because she was put on a raft. And I don't know, you might probably know this from your classes or something, but she ended up like being a major preacher, evangelist, slayed a dragon and all kinds of stuff in
Yeah.
medieval stories
Yeah,
about
she had
her.
quite a life.
Right. But I mean, and that's one of those examples. She couldn't have been a priest in the times that they were talking about this, or do the things that she was supposed to have done. But somehow they had no problem with Martha, who knew Jesus, being this brave, courageous warrior, evangelist, preacher. It's just this very strange yes and no that kind of keeps surfacing all the time, in my opinion.
I think it keeps surfacing because it's something that the church keeps over the centuries wrestling with. That Jesus does, you know, affirm a female disciple, right? Several female disciples. Jesus affirms this is the better choice. And yet sometimes the church has found itself in various situations, maybe directly, maybe indirectly, as Ron points out, sort of pushing women into the other choice, the other direction, you know, and I think that's a good conversation to keep having, and a good that's a reality we ought to be struggling with. However, we figure it out, and I think there are better ways and worse ways, but I think it's a conversation that has to be had. That Jesus does affirm Martha here for what she's chosen, or Mary for what she's chosen, and you know, so in what ways do we as the church, in what ways should we be affirming women in that same choice, that same decision to listen and hear and obey? And that's not the same thing as necessarily as preaching, or as I get that that's not necessarily synonymous, but how do we affirm that, and how do we encourage that while Martha's choice here isn't a bad choice, Mary's is the better choice. Dad pointed out that Dad just pushed his iPad over to me to point out an article he was reading, I think, about and maybe this is kind of something that Ron mentioned earlier on. Work that we do for the Lord is good and important. Indeed, we're told that God has prepared good works for us to do. And we're also told that we'll be rewarded on our works at the Bema seat of Christ. But our work and witness for him must be balanced with meaningful worship. Unless we sit at his feet and spend quality time communing with our Lord as a priority, our life will be fruitless, our work will become tedious, and our witness will be void of power. Work that we do for the Lord is good and profitable, but it must be combined with worshiping at his feet. So I can appreciate that. I can see where that's coming from. I don't know. To me, the tension here between Mary and Martha reflects a lot about kind of what we read into the text and what we bring to it. It often shapes, I think in this story, often shapes how we hear it. If you've ever been left to do Thanksgiving dinner while, somebody else who you thought was going to help, sits in the living room and watches TV, maybe you come from it to this from a certain perspective. If you're a woman who feels that your calling is to learn and to sit at Jesus' feet, to be a disciple, and you don't feel that the culture you live in or the church that you're a part of affirms that, then you come at this from a certain perspective. And I think we've got to hear those ways of reading this text and be willing to listen and be willing to think about how we encourage women to the better choice of being a disciple.
Hey, Patrick, I wonder if Martha wasn't so distracted and didn't say anything about being distracted, if Jesus would have even made that comment about Mary choosing the better one. Because, and as a woman, I know so many, and men too, we all have different roles.
Yep.
And if there are talents, we're good at it, or if it's our passion, we're good at them. And so I can't see Jesus berating or saying this person has chosen the better. But again, maybe if she wasn't being pushy about getting help, she could have been celebrated in the work that she was doing.
And I think that's a really good point, because that does seem to be what elicits this comment from Jesus. And I know, it's interesting. I know men, I know a lot of men, right, who, they're awfully uncomfortable leading a communion meditation or teaching a class or even talking about anything theological, but they'd love to go fix a window for a widow at church. They'd love to, to do some work around the church building. And that's kind of or cook something, or not to focus on the gender stereotypes, even to do some of the serving and the cooking that we're talking about here. I know men who love that sort of thing and who are very good at it. And for whom hospitality is something that they feel called to. And I don't want to discourage that, right? I don't want to be somebody who says that's not real Christianity, that's not real discipleship, because I don't think Jesus says that.
I think that my impression, maybe I'm reading into this, but my impression is not that at the end of the day, Jesus would have said, okay, Mary, 2 stars for you. Martha, I know you helped, 1 star for you.
Right.
I don't think that's the lesson of this. I think the problem is that Martha wanted it she wanted to decide what Mary should do. And I think that's applicable in more than just Sunday school versus church kitchen. I think that's applicable in what you were saying and what Colette was saying, that we can have different strengths, interests that don't have to be defined by what someone else thinks my interest should be. And it might change from year to year, depending on what's needed, going on, what we're good at. I mean, it doesn't have to be this person is the student, this person is the cleaner, unless that person really thrives in that job. And then I don't think we should be pushing them to do the other role, like you said. And then the other thing is like remembering to appreciate that piece and not like wish them to, oh, I just wish this person would be willing to
Yeah.
to do this in the service. If he really is shy and doesn't want to do that, I don't think we should be making people into roles that we define for them in that way, whichever way it goes. And not just about gender, it's also about personality, skills, whatever. Anyway, I'll shut up.
Yeah, that's a really good point. One of the things I jotted down here, a question to ask, is there only one way to be a disciple? And sometimes I think, that's what Martha's suggesting, right? Mary's got to do this my way. Mary's got to be what I want her to be. Mary's got to go about this the way I would go about it. Instead of sitting and listening, she needs to be showing her love for Jesus by making him food, or whatever it is. And I do think there is that temptation that we have to fall in line with, this is what is expected. This is the way it's supposed to be for a man or a woman, for a younger person or an older person, or whatever it is. This is the way to be a disciple. And there, in truth, there's not one way to be a disciple, I don't think. I think there's lots of ways to be disciples. And I think our Lord appreciates those ways and welcomes us in following him in those ways, even when the ways that we might want to follow him conflict with what somebody else expects of us. I do think that one of the things I pull away from this story is that our busyness can distract us from being disciples. I think part of the problem is that at some point in all the preparations, Mary goes from, I'm welcoming the Lord here, to, I got to get this food out on the table. I got to get this done. And I see myself in that. I see that, I can certainly get so caught up in what seems urgent and what needs to be done now and what somebody's looking for, or what I think somebody's looking for, that I can forget that everything we do for the Lord, right? Everything we do for his glory. And I can lose sight of that. And that's when I start treating people like a jerk. And that's when I start saying, Lord, won't somebody help me with this? and instead of, taking joy in the things that I'm able to do and doing them with, all my heart, the best I can to serve him.
Isn't that the thing that's sometimes overlooked? One thing is needful. One thing is needful. Jesus is basically saying the meal is not needful. That which can lead someone to heaven is the only thing that's needful. Jesus' words are the only thing that's needful.
Yeah, I mean, I think we sometimes would say, well, we got to eat, and it's true. But I think the point is well taken. That Jesus does seem to sort of boil it down to there's less that we got to do right now than we imagine sometimes. And if if this doesn't get done right now, the world doesn't stop. And if this doesn't get done right now, if the will of God is done, if the work of the Lord is done, then I need to take a breath and accept that and be thankful for that, even when it doesn't go the way I want it to go.
Yeah, I am reminded though, again, this idea of trying to combine and not see it as a black and white choice here. The one of the most famous, in the history of prayer, one of the most famous writers was Brother Lawrence. The practice of the presence of God. And it just so happens that among his other jobs, Brother Lawrence was the cook for the monastery.
And the dishwasher.
And the dishwasher. He at one point was the shoemaker and stuff, but mainly is known as being the cook, and not necessarily the head cook either. But the whole book is about how he discovered that even in the course of doing those things, he could still practice the presence of God. He could still be doing those in God's presence. And so if you have to criticize Martha a little bit here, the point might be that you still can do some of this stuff, and at the same time recenter and focus on and think about, Jesus and his teachings, maybe even overhear some stuff. It can be, they're not mutually exclusive. The choice is not always listen or cook.
Yep.
Brother Lawrence managed to combine those things, and we can do that too, right? There's no distinction really between the sacred and I'm not using the right word, sacred and the profane, the lay and the clerical. The point is, we can do our ordinary work, our regular tasks, and we can dedicate those things to the Lord. So when you're feeding your family and preparing things, well, that's an act of love that I think God approves of, not that. And again, that's charity, that's taking care of people. Is that worse than instead letting the family go hungry and because I wanted to read a book of the Bible?
Right.
I don't think James would be real happy about that. So anyway.
I don't, and I think the evidence is that Martha this was not her best day.
Get a bad day. Yeah. We all have bad days, right?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's a lesson, but
Yeah.
I don't think it's a character flaw.
I agree.
No.
I agree.
And I like what Alan shared. I think I share this a lot. We call it psychological flexibility. It's when we can pause in our day and say what matters most right now.
Mhm.
And I think that's what Martha, and that's not a knock, but we don't always do that. We live, the future or in the past, and very seldom do we pause and say, what's most important right now
Mhm.
and what we're doing. And I think that maybe is the one thing. It's not a comparative thing of that they're bad and what their roles are, but what matters most right now.
Mhm.
And that seems to be Jesus wanting people to pay attention to him a little bit at that moment.
Yeah.
And not that we're not going to eat and have a good meal and practice hospitality, but what matters right now.
Yeah.
And that keeps us on the straight and narrow. And I think Ron said it keeps us focused about what we should be doing in the moment and not being comparing ourselves to other people, but what's important now.
I think there was also, Patrick, you talked about the significance. Martha was, if she is what you say, and Lazarus isn't in the picture as much, and so she's really the owner of the house and everything, there's some prestige in having Jesus there. But as Christy tells me, well, if this isn't good, they're going to criticize me, not you. Right? I mean, that's just the way things are. If the house isn't picked up, no one's going to be, they should, because I'm probably more responsible for the mess, right? But she probably is a little bit more invested in the meal and the preparations going well. Is that a little bit of pride that's maybe getting in the way when and directing her choice? I think it makes us it should make us a little more sympathetic to Martha too, because these gender stereotyping, apparently, if Lazarus had been in at Jesus's feet, no one would have said, blamed him for the meal not being right? But, she may be feeling a little bit, she probably is the older sister. She may be getting a little pressure here, and that may be getting in her way too, as well. But it's understandable, I think.
Absolutely. I mean, and we all have that. We all have those things that we're proud of. We feel like it reflects on us, and we want it to be perfect, and we want it to be right. And we can even get pretty crabby to people who get in the way of that if we're not careful. And that's what happens with Martha here. And I don't, like, as you said, I don't think it's a character flaw. I think it's just a rough day, tough day, a tough, lot on her, and she makes she maybe makes a mistake, but yeah.
Wouldn't it be nice to know what happened next?
Yeah. Yeah. Did Martha get up, or did Mary get up and go help? Did Martha come and sit down? Who knows?
I would like it if, I don't know, I would like it if Martha said, "Oh, okay," and sat down, and then they all had a cold cuts or something.
Yeah. Well, fine. We'll have deli meat later. Yeah, or something. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Martha will not help you immediately sit down.
Yeah.
Maybe Martha just says, okay, you can all just have some cold ham.
Yeah, right. Fine. Go down the street to that restaurant. Oh, that's right. There isn't one down the street.
Ron has an uncle who is truly the at family meals, which are often at their house. He is truly the behind the scenes, keeping everything together guy. Like, he's cooking, he's putting food out, he's asking everyone, not in an annoying way in any way, just a true host. And he's super quiet, like he's not a boisterous, outgoing fellow. It appears, I should ask him sometime, but it appears that is his giving. And he doesn't resent it. And he seems to thrive on the other folks enjoying each other's company. And I think the difference is, if that's your role at that moment, and you can still do it, it's your gift, it's your
Calling.
it's your calling at that moment. I'm not saying it always needs to be. It's something that is positive, uplifting, good for your soul. When it turns into, I don't know why I'm doing all this. Doesn't anybody appreciate it?
Yeah.
Then it's the stop and think. And maybe you need to give the role to somebody else, or maybe you need to. I think that might be kind of the heart of the problem here. I'm not sure, but I was thinking about the difference.
I think that's a really good point. Where we often go wrong is when we start to feel resentful, when we start to feel that we're unappreciated, that all the hard work that we're putting out, nobody's paying any attention to, and nobody cares about. It starts to turn inward, right? And it's all about us, and it's all about, and that's, I think, where many of us go wrong, and where it becomes less about what I'm doing for the Lord, and more about what I'm doing for appreciation. I'm doing for whatever it is. I'm doing for that self, that feeling that I have where things go well, and I can feel good about myself. And I think that's a distinction we probably need to make sometimes.
I think it could go wrong the other way too. I think we can put so much into study and learning,
Oh, yeah.
and being right about how many scriptures we know, and can we recite the books in order, and maybe you can't, so I'm a better student than you are, and all of this that gets away from the point of doing this to begin with. And so I think it can go, well, of course what I do is better because I'm studying the Bible, and it shouldn't be that shouldn't be the direction either. So, and in my opinion, I don't know that, I'm not sure you get that from this lesson, but
Yeah. No, but you're right.
Go the
You're
other
right.
way.
Yeah, I think you're right for sure. I was thinking that we need to close, but I was thinking of in some of the epistles, the spiritual gifts, right? And maybe that's what the spiritual gifts are. It's that you can do these things and you have a very clear sense of why you're doing them. Does that make sense? That maybe, maybe that these things are given to you, these roles are given to you, and that's how you know what your gifts are. That you just, with that particular thing, you just have a clear sense of why you're doing this, and you're undivided in it, and you're fully there, and you're fully invested, and even if maybe not everybody always appreciates it, it just, in a way, it just doesn't matter, because you know that's from the Lord, and that's something that you do for Him. And maybe that's really what those gifts are kind of about. I think hospitality, by the way, is listed as one of those gifts at one point. Well, we need to wind up. Thanks. I would tell you that Liz texted me and said that Sarah has been cleared to go home, and but she has to stay one more night because they have to set her up to have IV antibiotics at home for a few weeks. And whoever was supposed to set it up won't be available until tomorrow. So she's got to stay one more night, but not because she's not doing well. So I think some answered prayers there and some really good news. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate your comments and your thoughts as always. Hope you have a good rest of your week. We'll see you later.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
everyone-
Everyone have a good evening.
You too.
Thank